Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar tonight. Just in this first 3 to 5 minutes, let me briefly go over Alliance for Impact, which is our host organization. It is short for AFI, and it is formerly called Coffee Club. I think most people are very familiar with this, so I'm probably gonna run through this very quick. And the mission of our organization is basically to empower Asian Americans and to participate and make positive impacts in all aspects of society through knowledge sharing, collaboration, and cross-cultural communication. And partnered with this, there's also the Vice Academy, which is also a nonprofit organization and is committed to bring the best quality financial, investment, communication, or leadership programs into classroom, like for kids, both through K-12 students and also adults. Oh, this is not letting me click. Okay. And here are some examples of our impact. For example, recently in COVID-19, we have raised and provided $5.8 million worth of PPEs to the tri-state region and in partnership with ACUC. And there's also 200 plus online events per year. Since March 2020, we have been holding like virtual seminars like this one to help new immigrant families to bridge the cultural gaps in the United States. And other than those, we also have high cohesion community, and there's also the AFI Academy, and then there's community building with the UA3's Community First Food Pantry. And then next Wednesday, which is our closest next special webinar, we have speaker Dong Sun, which is a campaign and fundraising manager for NGO Young. Yeah, and it would be really cool because the topic of this webinar will be no votes, no rights, and how to increase Asian youth political participation. So now moving on to today's webinar, we have Serena Ding, which is right here, and she is a Jefferson Scholar and Echo Scholar at UVA, which is the University of Virginia. She's also a recipient of Leadership, Music, and STEM Awards, top merit-based colleges, and also a founding president for United States Arts and co-founder of Student Port, which are nonprofit organizations fighting for USG, which stands for environment, social, and governance. So before we move on to our today's event, we have our last page, which you can scan the QR code on the left to join for the AFI Youth Chat group, which they'll be posting a lot of events for youth students. And then on the QR code on the left, we have the AFI English Seminar WeChat group, which you will then receive a lot of updates for English seminars that will be happening like this one right now. So yeah, Serena, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Do you mind if I share my screen for?
Yeah,
Thank you. All right, please let me know if you, can everyone see my slides? Cindy, can you see them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Let me just start them. Okay, all right. Oh, sorry. Good evening, everyone, or good morning.
On May 14th, 2017, my mother spent her first Mother's Day without her mother, and I spent my first Mother's Day without my grandmother.
Sorry, one of my recordings accidentally played. My apologies for that. Let me begin again. So good evening, everyone, or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from today. I'm currently live streaming from my college dorms, so apologies if you hear any strange noises. College dorms can be a bit unpredictable sometimes, but in all seriousness, I'm very honored and incredibly humbled to be able to share my experience, stories, successes, and failures with all of you today. Before I begin, I want to again take the opportunity to thank Alliance for Impact and the Chinese Coffee Club for this opportunity and for providing us with this platform today. And also, I really want to thank the volunteers who have worked very hard to make this event happen today. I also wanted to briefly mention Student Port, which is a Gen Z global community that I helped found and co-run, as Cindy briefly mentioned before in my bio. Student Port is helping, has helped collaborate with this event today. Now, a little bit about me before we begin the main meat of the presentation. I know Cindy mentioned some of these points. I just want to go over them in a little more depth because I know some of these organizations are not very familiar to some of you. So I am a Jefferson Scholar, an Eccles Scholar at the University of Virginia. Jefferson Scholarship is the premier undergraduate scholarship at the University of Virginia. It is a full ride scholarship, entirely selected on the basis of merit. The Eccles program is the flagship undergraduate honors program at the University of Virginia. And I am at UVA, I'm the founding vice president of the speaker series at the UVA chapter of Scholars of Finance. I'm also a program manager for an ESG education related startup. Starting next week, I will be an Ignite Fellow at Teach for America, which is a paid fellowship for college students to teach elementary and middle school students in underprivileged Title I schools in the United States. And then the last 2 points, which I will mention in much more detail in some of the following slides, are the 2 organizations that I founded and ran throughout my high school career. I'm the founding president of United Under Arts, which is a global 501c3 nonprofit that currently has about 700 members, 41 chapters in 25 countries on 6 continents. I'm also the administrator and co-founder of Student Port. We currently have about 1,800 members or so. So when I was invited to share my experiences today, it took me quite a bit of time to decide the topics. I know many of you are in high school or have children who are in high school and are going to be applying to college very soon. So I know you guys are all probably very interested in the scholarship application process and the college application process. But I think more important than those results is my personal journey from being a very shy, typical nerdy Asian American kid to becoming a more self-confident student leader, and also why I chose a somewhat more unconventional path than what you might expect from an Asian American youth in particular. I hope that my personal growth story will help answer many of the questions you may have about what potential paths your student may take, and can also help alleviate your fears if you feel that your child is not going down a traditional academic Ivy League, very focused path. So I'll be focusing on 3 decisions in particular that I made. The first one is the choice of where I lived. I lived in Carmel, Indiana, growing up, but I later decided to move to New York City. The second choice is a choice of high school. So I had several options, which I will touch on more, between different top public high schools, top private high schools, and a very special school, a performing arts school that I ended up attending. And then the last part is my college application journey and why I chose the schools I chose to apply to and focus on, and what the scholarship application process kind of looks like, and what tips and advice I can give to students that would like to pursue those kinds of opportunities. So first off, I grew up in a very middle-class suburb town in Indiana. Lots of our schools are very, very good. The public schools, that is, they're very well ranked comparatively. And my life was pretty peaceful, I would say. It was a very homogenous community, mostly Asian Americans, Caucasian Americans. Most of my friends were ABCs from very similar family backgrounds. And my main concern was just getting good grades and eventually, doing well in high school and then getting to a top college, which I think is what a lot of Asian and other young Americans really like to focus on. But right around the time I graduated from middle school, my family went through some big changes. My maternal grandmother passed away after a decade of suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and my mom decided to move to New York City to renew her clinical career. So I was originally set on staying in Indiana with my father and younger sister, going to our local high school, which is an amazing high school. But at the last minute, a family friend who was from New York City, and a former principal of the renowned Stuyvesant High School in New York City, suggested that I should try to test for the specialized high schools in New York City. I had, up until this point, I was always a very shy and more introverted kid. Up until that time, you couldn't pay me to stand in front of a stage and talk to hundreds of people. That would never happen. But when my parents asked me about this, and asked me, do you really want to go to, such a large, very intense and pressure cooker type of school, in, such a diversity of New York City, it's not going to be anything like your hometown, obviously. I kind of surprised them because my original thought while they told me that was, of course, that sounds very scary, and I don't think that I should do that from a standpoint of, oh, is that the best choice for me and my personality? But then my father said something. He said, schools like Stuyvesant, they're super competitive. You know that, right? Are you sure is that something you would be interested in trying? And I said, you know what? I think I'm also very competitive as well. And so that answer kind of surprised myself. It definitely surprised my parents. But years later, now, especially when I reflect on that dialogue, I realized that, every student kind of has that feeling as well. And that every student, even if they seem really shy and introverted, probably has something in them that, wants to change their life or wants to experience something different. And that was with me too. I wanted to have an adventure. I wanted to go to New York City and see it. And I thought I was competitive enough too, deep down inside. So now I'm going to talk about my decision as to why I chose LaGuardia High School in particular. So when I went to New York City and started doing all the testing and all the auditioning, there were 3 schools in particular that I was aiming for. Stuyvesant High School, of course. Stuyvesant is kind of the known as the Harvard of high schools in New York City, let's put it that way. Very low acceptance rate, comparable to most Ivy League colleges, just at a high school level. And then another school that I was focusing on was Townsend Harris. Townsend Harris is also a very academically top school. It focuses a little more on humanities compared to Stuyvesant, which is more known for the STEM side of things, but both very top academic schools. And then there was LaGuardia High School, my alma mater. LaGuardia High School is unique in that it is a performing arts dual mission high school. We have all the regular academics, but it also has a major arts component that is required for every student attending the school. So Stuyvesant accepts you based on how well you score on a particular test called the SHSAT. Townsend Harris looks at your grades and does an interview. LaGuardia High School does look at your grades, but one of the most important components of your application is the audition process, which is you go to the school on one Saturday, Sunday, and you choose to audition for one of the studios, one of the art studios in the school. And you need to be artistically talented enough for them to accept you, in addition to having, a decent academics as well. So I was lucky enough to get into all 3 of those schools. And I also considered some of the top private boarding schools, such as Phillips Academy or St. Paul's. I ended up deciding to go to LaGuardia High School, and this was not an easy decision at all. I was definitely many times throughout when I was going to LaGuardia High School, I would always ask myself, did I really make the right decision? What would have happened if I went to Stuyvesant instead? And there were always times when there was also times I felt insecure as well. But now I think I would say that I made the right decision, even though that has come from a very long journey of doubt and trying a lot of new things and, difficulty. But so the reasons why I chose LaGuardia High School over private boarding schools or over the other top academic schools. So first of all, the choice between public and private, I've only ever gone to public schools, so I can't really fully elaborate on what the private school experience might be. There are pros and cons to both naturally. I just felt that I think at a public school, I would be able to more freely express myself. I felt that at some private schools, because everything is so laid out for you and because they have all these opportunities and whatnot, it feels a little more like sometimes my path would be more set, in that they would push you to do, the best in whatever category you chose. And I kind of wanted a different experience. I wanted to be at a public school where I could also kind of fight for my own opportunities. That's not necessarily the right choice or the choice for everyone. That's just the personal decision that I made. And then in terms of why I chose LaGuardia High School over Stuyvesant or over Townsend Harris, I did definitely originally want to go to Stuyvesant. I was like, that's the school I want to go to. People call it the Harvard of high schools. That must be the best high school in New York City. But I remember, first of all, my mother told me, LaGuardia High School is so unique though. You just, all the arts and, that seems like a very interesting school. It's a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity because most students are not going to be able to go to a dual mission school that allows you to focus on both the arts and academics. And I understood her point, but that wasn't really quite what I wanted to do. So I originally, kind of rejected her reasoning and was going to end up at Stuyvesant or Townsend Harris anyways. But then my dad kind of stepped in and he pointed out, if you go to Stuyvesant, you go to a school that is academically, pretty well ranked, similar kind of to the schools back in Indiana, although Stuyvesant is even higher ranked and has even more pressure. The biggest thing that he said that kind of really resonated with me and kind of swayed my decision was he mentioned that, if you look at the statistics, Stuyvesant is like 79.99% Asian, ethnically Asian. And there's nothing wrong with Asian people. I am Asian personally. The issue is that, I'm going to school like New York City. I'm going to a city like New York City, one of the most diverse cities on this planet. And I'm going to go into the same enclave that I was back at home, even though I specifically chose to go to this place to broaden my horizons. And that was a very good point. He mentioned that if I went to Stuyvesant, my main contribution would be that I would bump their 79.999% of Asians up to 80%. And I was like, you do really have a point there. If I'm coming to New York City and I really want to challenge myself, then I should probably try a path that's not exactly the same as what I would have done in Indiana, only more academically competitive. And so that's how I ended up at LaGuardia High School. A little bit more about LaGuardia High School. The specific studios are visual art, dance, instrumental music, technical theater, and vocal music. I specifically was in the instrumental music department. I play alto saxophone and piano. And like I mentioned, it is a dual mission performing arts school, which means we take about 3 to 4 extra arts classes every day, which also means that we have by far the longest day of any public high school in New York City, which was definitely a fact that made me kind of regret LaGuardia High School sometimes. And I was getting up at like 5 in the morning and being like, why do I have to go to school this early? But they were pretty fun classes overall. And there's some of the classes that I would say probably made the biggest impact on me, even though personally I'm not going to go into music as a career. We've also had a lot more, some pretty famous and some pretty interesting alumni that some of you may have heard of. Jennifer Aniston, Al Pacino, for some of our maybe older generation folks. For the younger generation, some people that we've had graduate from our school are that you might be familiar with are Nicki Minaj, Awkwafina, Ansel Elgort, and Timothy Chalamet. My school also inspired the Hollywood movie Fame, of which there's been 2 renditions. The most recent one being in 2009. You can look up the movie later if you want. It basically just describes the daily life of an art school that was modeled off of ours. Not completely accurate. We don't like dance on the tables just because that's a safety hazard, but it does model in some aspects what it's like going to a dual mission performing arts school. These are more pictures. This is Timothy Chalamet. This is a video he made about statistics. Ironically, I had the same statistics teacher as him. This is not a video that she likes us bringing up a lot, but these are all videos that you can find online as well if you want to kind of know what the day-to-day life at a performing arts high school is like, and what kind of opportunities it affords you that may be different from a more traditional academic, solely academic focused high school. And so these choices, I think, even though at that time I wasn't thinking about it, that wasn't really a deciding factor, that choice also really shaped how I would become a student leader and become more confident in presenting myself and going after the opportunities that I want to have. At LaGuardia High School in particular, LaGuardia is a very active high school in terms of protesting and in terms of getting involved in all sorts of activism and things that they really want. I remember in 10th grade, we managed to get our own principal removed after she had done some things that were very bad for the school in terms of budgeting and classes. So LaGuardia, I think that entire environment and just going to a school where I could hear a lot more diverse perspectives and a school like Stuyvesant really helped make me more aware of my own personal ability to shape change and to become a leader within my community. So now I'm going to discuss a couple leadership extracurriculars I did during high school. First off is going to be United Under Arts. So United Under Arts, one of my interests in high school was being able to bridge arts and sciences and find affordable healthcare solutions for the community, particularly for our more vulnerable populations like seniors and like young children. Because of my grandmother passing away from Alzheimer's before I moved to New York City, I really wanted to find some sort of way that I could help seniors with dementia using my artistic ability. So one day outside of class, I ran into a documentary called Alive Inside, and the documentary really showed a new aspect to music that I had never considered before. It showed how music can help somewhat alleviate dementia, at least some of the more painful aspects of dementia, and can even somehow stimulate lost memories. So that inspired me to take a training course with the Alive Inside Foundation, and also inspired me to start volunteering by playing music at a local nursing home in Flushing, Queens, which was where I lived in New York City for my first 3 years. Specifically, I played for seniors with dementia. And I saw, during my tenure there, I saw so many elders kind of fading away and were really abandoned. I rarely, honestly, ever saw family members ever coming to visit them or friends or anything like that. And I was really grateful that sometimes I could see some light coming back into their eyes or some memories kind of returning as I played music from their childhood, or music that they had really enjoyed before. But of course, it's, every single time I walked home after playing music, I, would always remember that, this isn't really truly enough. In particular, I'm thinking my own grandparents are overseas. They're in China. And I can play music for the seniors in my community, but I will never be able to reach them. I will never be able to reach a lot of the other seniors, not even like in other countries. Like I can't even, I couldn't alone reach other seniors in upstate New York either, for instance. So that's kind of when I decided I wanted to start United Under Arts. There's so many talented musicians at my school and other, talented dancers and whatnot as well. And, I really wanted to have them utilize their talent for a positive social impact. So I first started it at my school, gathering many of my friends and classmates who are also passionate about using their artistic abilities for positive social impact. And then in late 2019, I decided to start expanding beyond my school and my New York City community. I also registered it as a 501c3 nonprofit. That was a very long process, but very well worth it in the end. And now, of course, we have, over 700 members in over 20 countries on all continents, except for Antarctica, still working on that one. And we also have about 41 chapters where chapters are based on on one specific city, or if they're large enough, on one specific state or province. And they run local events in their communities. Here are some more, a little more of our numbers. And now, so as I was running United Under Arts, I also frequently got a lot of questions from other aspiring student leaders wanting to build their own organizations or make their own impact in their own communities. So once I heard so many of the same questions and so many of the same concerns, this kind of inspired me to join with another youth leader to begin the organization Student Port. Student Port's mission is to kind of help student leaders in particular gain resources, gain advice, and gain partnerships and collaborations and network with other student leaders. It is an international community. This one we decided we did not register it as a nonprofit just because the model of the organization didn't really require it. But it is a global community hub for student leaders. We have about 1,800 or so members and about 200 or so organizations that have promoted on our platforms or found new members or found their leadership team on our servers. Before I move on to the college and application journey, I just wanted to also emphasize that, of course, I know academics are still important. I don't want the takeaway to be that, don't focus on academics, because they're still important, of course. And just because I, decided to go to a dual mission performing arts high school does not mean that, I didn't have passion for things like STEM or things like business as well. And I think doing things like STEM competitions and presentations and maintaining high grades is definitely still doable and compatible with student leadership and other non-academic activities. Because after all, for being really technical, when it comes to college or scholarship academic applications, or when it comes to internship or job searches, of course, you still want to show that you're academically capable. So the point that I want everyone to take away today is not that, academics, don't focus on academics, but rather that solely or mostly focusing on academics is not the only path to success. And so, in fact, I will be honest, even though I did do a lot of STEM competitions and presentations as well, I also never really technically won anything as impressive as the Regeneron Science Talent Search or, math Olympiad medals. And I also never took any STEM after school coaching programs. There are a lot of subjects in STEM where I didn't even do any major competitions, unlike many other Asian Americans. And I just wanted to emphasize also, again, the world needs diversity. You know, we do need scientists and we do need engineers, we do need doctors and lawyers, but we also need more than just those. And I think we can all find our own unique places by being unique people. We can, you know, you can choose to step outside of your comfort zone, challenge yourself on your weaknesses, broaden your perspectives and horizons. And I really, especially for, I think, our Chinese or Asian or other ethnic minority Americans in particular, I think, you know, we really want to remember that our generation of parents, especially, you know, coming from overseas, coming from cultures in particular that are very academically focused, can sometimes have a narrow vision focusing on specialty areas, on some of the specialty areas like the traditional STEM and, you know, that type. I know a lot of you are parents on here today. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not trying to degrade you or say you guys are bad parents. Of course not. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just want you all to remember that that may or may not be the right path for your children. You know, let them explore their interests and pursue their own dreams to a certain extent. You know, remember to be open-minded when they're pursuing these things, and encourage them even when they fail. Because I think we especially in our minority groups, we need more passionate leaders. We need more passionate leaders like Angeline. And so I am just incredibly grateful that my parents never really pushed me, and that's in any like one specific direction. They pushed me when, you know, I told them this is a goal I want to achieve, and they made sure I kept on track for that and I did what I said I was going to do. But they never told me you have to be a doctor, you have to be a scientist. And I think that's very important, in particular as the child is growing up and going through middle school and high school and is very you know, and is still, you know, looking for outside guidance in particular. Okay, so the last component today that I want to discuss is my college and scholarship application journey. So when I started applying, I kind of already knew that I really wanted to focus a lot on merit-based scholarship and leadership programs. I went through a long list of pretty much all the top schools that offer full ride or full tuition scholarships, especially those that provide not only like money, but also other benefits like leadership programs or help with internship searching, stuff like that. And there were a few top school. There are, you know, quite a few good schools that provide full ride scholarships. But the one that was kind of a top 10 school that some Asian parents might really want their child to go to is Duke University. And I will mention Duke University and their Robertson Scholars Program, their merit-based full ride scholarship program, which I was a finalist for and went through the whole process a little later. The only program actually that, you know, I thought I wanted to attend and was willing to give up a full ride scholarship to another school for was the Life Science Management program at the University of Pennsylvania, a small dual degree program between Wharton in the School of Science, in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. So that was, you know, a program that I really loved because I loved how life science and business was combined in such a very small and unique program, and it did have a dedicated support staff, so it was something that really attracted me. But nonetheless, I'm still very glad with where I ended up today, and I think, you know, a lot of this journey, a lot of the stuff that I went through, even when I wasn't happy with the result, ended up being a blessing in disguise. And also, before I move on into discussing the 3 of the top scholarship offers that I interviewed for, received, I also just want to stress that, you know, there is nothing wrong with wanting to go to a top private university, and these are all amazing universities with fantastic opportunities. If you can get in and take full advantage of all the resources they're offering, then I would say that, you know, attending such a school is very well worth it. But top private schools may not be a fit for everyone, or, you know, a top scholarship or leadership program could also be as good a fit, or maybe even better a fit for some people. So again, I want you all to remember to be open-minded and to consider multiple options in the college search, not just, I want to go to Harvard or I want to go to Stanford. So before I start giving a very quick overview of some of the elite scholarship programs, I just want to go over again some of the elite programs that, sorry, Zoom is not being very friendly with me today. But again, the lessons learned. So the big city experience versus the small town experience, both offer advantages, but the big city does definitely give you some new perspectives to consider and can really help in pushing you out of your comfort zone just by virtue of being a big city where you kind of have to look after yourself a bit more. Public schools versus private schools, again, both offer their own unique pros and cons. I do think, however, that public schools do somewhat allow you to push yourself a bit more without as much resource to fall back on, and can help make you more resilient in some ways. Academics versus extracurricular activities. Of course, academics are important, just be willing as well to try different things, be willing as well to get out of your comfort zone and to fix a problem that you see in your community instead of kind of complaining or waiting for someone else to fix it. STEM versus the arts, this kind of may be more particular for me, but there is definitely a way to combine those two and also to be involved in those two as well. They are not as strictly separate as they might seem on paper. And also, this was something that I meant to mention in the college part, but ED versus regular decision, particularly for those that are going to be applying for college soon. Just make sure if you are applying early decision, you've probably heard this already, but you really have to be sure that that's something that you want to do. It is binding. It is very rare that you can get out of that contract. And it's, you don't want to be like, oh, this wasn't really my top school after all. So be very careful about it. If money is a huge factor, I would not do it, or at least, run the net price calculator for the college. Be very, very sure. This has to be a college that you would give up for any other program, any other scholarship, any other, anything that you may have received during the regular decision round. So be sure about this one. And of course, also be careful, check through all your applications. Again, this is about college applications, though it could also apply for other, if you're applying for internships or anything like that. Do not, I've made a lot of mistakes during the college app process. A lot of other students probably will as well, but just want to remind everyone, please double check all of your applications. Also make sure that you are replying to the right person on your emails. You are writing the right prompts for your essays. Just please double check, and please double check before you, a good amount of time before you submit these things, just in case, the worst did happen and you have to rewrite them. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce 3 of the programs that I received or went through the process with in terms of the merit-based scholarship / leadership programs. So the first up is the Ingram Scholars Program at Vanderbilt University. Vanderbilt actually offers 3 major full tuition scholarships. This was the one that I was lucky enough to receive. And this one does require a bit more of an extensive process than the other 2 scholarships. So this one is called the Ingram Scholars Program. The main values are character, leadership, service, and giving. And they are named after a very wealthy person named E. Bronson Ingram, who was the first donor. And it is still today supported by his family. In order to be able to apply to this one, you need to apply to Vanderbilt University by an earlier deadline. I believe in my year, it was November 28th, 29th or so. And then you also need to write 3 specific essays for the Ingram Scholars Program. They will evaluate your application based on your Vanderbilt application, your regular Common App or Coalition App, but they'll also look at your 3 Ingram specific essays. And in terms of selectivity, this one was there were about 20 finalists in our year. And I think that seems to be roughly the same for the class of 2026 selection process as well. And there's about, there's several thousand people at least who apply, as in like they also wrote the Ingram essays, because you have to write those in order to receive full consideration for the scholarship. So pretty competitive process just to get to finalist stage. And then we had a final interview. It was a panel interview. The Ingram family was on the call as well. So they do have a very hands-on part of the process. The final interview, like I mentioned, it's a panel, not a super long interview. It is definitely a bit different than your typical college application interview, and I would say requires some special preparation. It's not going to be exactly the same questions as you might expect from a college interview. And then it ended up in our year, there were about 9 recipients. So about half of the finalist group made it. The next one is the Robertson Scholars Program at Duke University and at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So their values are purposeful leadership, intellectual curiosity, and strength of character. It is funded again by a specific individual, by Julian Robertson, who is a billionaire hedge fund manager. Robertson is kind of unique in that it is a dual citizenship kind of scholarship. So even though you are technically attending either Duke University or UNC Chapel Hill, you are either a finalist for the Duke portion of the scholarship or a finalist for UNC. So I was a finalist for Duke. Even though, you are technically still, you would still be considered mostly a Duke student or mostly a UNC student, you do have access to both schools' resources. And in fact, you have to, like for Duke Robertson scholars, they have to spend a semester at UNC, and the same with the UNC scholars. This one is completely separate. Robertson Foundation is not officially affiliated with Duke or UNC admissions teams. They do not look at your Duke or UNC applications. You have 3 essays. You need to add 2 additional recommendation letters. You can have an optional school nomination. I did not do the optional school nomination because my school wasn't part of their system yet. But if your school is and you are able to get the nomination, that can also help your application. This one also is very interview intensive. There are 2 rounds of interviews. So you first go from the semifinalist stage, which is about 60 some semifinalists, and then out of that they whittle it down to about half of them are finalists, and about 16 recipients in total. So these interviews, there are panel interviews, and then there are also specific types called multiple mini interviews, MMIs, which were actually designed for medical school interviews. These are very particular interviews that you really, really want to prepare for. This was something that I should have prepared a lot more for, because they are very different. Again, even more different than the panel interviews for scholarships are compared to interviews for college admissions. And the last one that I want to mention today before we go into the question session is the program that I'm at, called the Jefferson Scholars Program at the University of Virginia. This one is older than Robertson and Ingram as well. It is a full ride and includes also a summer internship stipend and an exploratory fund to the University of Virginia. Their values are leadership, scholarship, and citizenship. And it is definitely one of the most well-funded scholarship corporations that I've seen currently. It has about a $600 million or so endowment. This one is also a separate application. It does not look at your UVA application. This one is also special in that you do need a school nomination, and schools are really only supposed to nominate about 1 a year. 2 if they really, really feel like they can't differentiate, but it's typically 1 a year. So you have to go through your school nomination process. You have to be competitive enough to be able to get that nomination. And then if you are lucky enough, you write 2 essays. And you tell them a little bit about your extracurriculars as well. So if you are lucky enough to pass that first round, what they will do is invite you in for a regional interview. So in my region in New York City, for instance, we had 2 rounds of interviews. I believe the first round was about 40 some students. And then they cut us down to 8 finalists for the second interview. And then eventually they chose 2 people from our region to represent New York City at the final finalist selection. Oh, and something I forgot to mention, Ingram, Robertson, and Jefferson, technically what the finalist weekend is usually on site, which means they actually pay for your airfare and fly you out specifically to that school. I believe Jefferson UVA does a whole week. Robertson and Ingram, I believe, is a weekend, but they'll pay for your airfare and pay for your living and food and all of that just to bring you to the school, just so you can do your final interview, get a feel for the school, and hopefully try to attract you to attend, even if you don't end up getting the scholarship. Obviously, for my year, they couldn't do the on-site thing, but they did still do everything that they could online. The university presidents all came to talk to us before we did our final rounds of interviews. Some other specific things that Jefferson has that I think are really great. They have a very dedicated program office. They have a huge building where we can all of us can go study in privately. It's very, very quiet, which is nice, and I like that. They also have a very dedicated support staff and facilities for scholars. For instance, they have an Institute for Leadership and Citizenship that all scholars must attend. They also have Modern Guild Training, which is a specialized training course in either finance or consulting that helps students prepare for finance or consulting interviews and jobs. There's a few other things, but I think, it's going to be time to do the Q&A session. And if any of you want to know more about specific scholarships, you can ask in the audience Q&A, or if there's enough questions, maybe we can consider doing another event specifically on the scholarship application process.